Right. So if we want to think about, say, 20 or 30 years ago, natural disasters were a rare phenomenon, relatively rare, not very rare, but still a rare phenomenon. It means that once in a century flood. So what does that mean? It means that it happens once in every 100 years. That is what it means, once in a century flood. So this big flood can only happen once in 100 years. What has happened now is this once in a century, once in 100 years flood has now become 3 times in 100 years. Not once in 100 years, but 3 times in 100 years. So it is no longer once a century flood. It is now 3 to 5 times a century flood. And so what does that mean? It means that very big floods, which would happen only once in 100 years, has now very big floods we get 5 times in 100 years. And that is the big change that we're seeing, is that we're seeing big floods happening much more frequently. Right, yes. 184 countries in the world are a large number of countries, many countries. So it includes big countries like Brazil, like India, like Sudan, United States, big countries, but it also includes very small countries like Papua New Guinea or Sri Lanka, or small countries around the world. So it covers everything. Now, the use of the data that we have has been quite remarkable. Why is it remarkable? Because it is now used for at two levels. 2 levels meaning what? It means that it is used to make global policy, so policy for the whole world. So when you want to make a big United Nations program for disaster risk reduction, what does disaster risk do? Is to decrease the risk that people have when faced with a disaster. That's disaster. So when you have a big program on disaster risk reduction and all the countries must make some program in their countries, so Thailand has to make one, India has to make one, Japan has to make one, every country has to make a little disaster risk reduction. They use our data. Why? They use our data to see where the disasters occur in their country. So you have a big country like India, most of the disasters, the floods will occur in the northeast and in the northeast country. So you have to focus on the northeast. So the data is very useful to see where in the country the disasters are occurring, and then you can make programs targeted to that part of the country. So it's a very practical tool to be used. The second way the data is used is also to use for global policy. So when you have something called the UN COP28, COP27, these are meetings. COP is a Conference of Partners. That is what it is, Conference of Partners, UN Conference of Partners. This is every year they have COP meetings. These are all countries come together in different parts of the world, and they look at how climate is changing and what are the big priorities. And they have had, last year, they had it in Egypt, the COP27. This year they're going to have it in Dubai, the COP28. And what do they discuss there? They discuss what are the big priorities. And one of the big priorities that was identified in the last COP in Egypt, which they will discuss again now to see, is whether we have enough data to measure the economic loss from climate extremes. So whether we can measure it, and we do some of that, but it has to be done better. It has to be done better. Thank you. So the health issues related to climate disasters are different from health issues related to geological disasters. Why am I saying this? This is important for Japan also, because there are two groups of disasters. One group is climate disasters. What is climate disasters? Storms, cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, floods, flash floods, all kinds of coastal floods, all kinds of floods, wildfires, droughts. I've just said storms, wildfires, droughts, heat waves. These are all climate disasters. Then there is another group called the geological disasters. Geological disasters are volcanic eruptions. You see it in Philippines, you see in many of the Latin American countries, volcanic eruptions, Indonesia, a lot of volcanoes in Indonesia, and earthquakes. Japan has a very high risk of earthquakes, as everybody knows. So those are the two groups. The health impact, the health issues related to one and to the other, it's geological and to the climatological. The two are a bit different. The climate disasters, the health impact of climate disasters, is linked very much to ecological changes, environmental changes. Acute environmental changes, so not environmental changes that occur over 15 years, but environmental changes that occur very suddenly. So you have a flood or you have a storm, and everything in your neighborhood has been destroyed. All the trees have fallen, all the brush has gone, the vegetation has gone. Now what does that mean? Once the vegetation is gone, or new things have started, or there's water, you get an increase in certain kinds of vectors. In public health, you call them vectors. What are vectors? They are any kind of insects who carry disease. So, for example, mosquitoes. So when you have a flood, and you have the flood waters come in, and the flood waters stay in different places, in puddles and so on and so forth, it becomes a ground for mosquito breeding. And then you have an increase in diseases like malaria, like dengue, like cholera. So you have all of those problems. So that's one set of problems which are for the environmental climate. For earthquakes, it's different. From earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, they are mostly linked to fractures, trauma, heavy crush syndrome, so you have something heavy falling on you. So that is slightly different. Yes, citizens, I think it's important to have disaster preparedness education starting already from primary school and in high school, because that is where you learn quickly. Young people learn quickly. That is their strength. They will learn very quickly. So that is when you have to provide them with the information on how to protect yourself. The other area where I think citizens should be prepared for disasters is at the community level. At the community level, at the village level, or in the neighborhood level. Now, in rich countries like Japan, it's not so difficult because there are mechanisms to the association. There is a neighborhood association, or there's civil protection, there are different kinds, Red Cross, there are different kinds. The problem is much more difficult in poor countries. For many reasons. I mean, there are villages are remote. When you look at big countries like, say, for instance, Indonesia or Vietnam. Well, Vietnam is not a very big country, but even in India, for example, which is not a very poor country, but still, the villages are very far. There's no transport, easy transport, so connections are very difficult. So for poor countries, community education is not so easy. Message to the children for natural disasters. There are two messages. One is a short-term message and one is a long-term message. The long-term message is that many of the natural disasters, in fact, most of natural disasters today are climate disasters. So the geological disasters are a very small part of the disasters, climate disasters. So if we want to reduce the impact of climate disasters, children today must start in their daily lives to take action on environmental degradation. This is a very important thing. Most of the problems come from environmental degradation. Floods happen because the environment is degraded, there's no forests anymore, there's no trees to keep the roots in the ground, water comes. So they have to work on environmental degradation. The short-term message is that children also have a duty in society. And their duty to society is to their parents, grandparents, and people around them, older people around them. And it is their responsibility also. And so they have to learn how to be able to help protect people who are more vulnerable, older people, disabled people. I think they need to, mentally handicapped people, they need to be attentive to that and to be able to protect them when there is a danger.